Stay tuned, Bigwater podcast. My friend, professional angler Johnnie Candle. He used to live in Ohio. Now he lives in North Dakota. You want to hear about 20 plus years of professional fishing and some shenanigans? Neither one of us pull punches. It's coming. Welcome back to the Bigwater podcast. I am Captain Ross Robertson, and as you know, fishing is what we do, but we talk about it too. And sometimes doing professional fishing is not actually casting the line, but a lot of the other things, and that's definitely what we're going to talk with a little bit today with our guest, Johnnie Candle. Because Johnnie, much like myself, is a guide and media personality. I don't know what you really call what we do, but it's a little bit of everything, and we're going to help give you a little insight as to it's not just casting a line to make a living in the fishing industry, and some guiding stuff. We're going to get in all kinds of stuff, because much like myself, Johnnie does not pull punches, and that's why I love him. Johnnie, thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be on. It's fun. It's good to talk with an old friend, and looks like I can maybe see my old home water in the background there if I squint a little bit. So it's always fun to chat with Ross.
It's funny that you say that is because people in the outdoor world know Johnnie Candle is the Devil's Lake guide and fisherman extraordinaire, but I know Johnnie Candle from Ohio, and that's really where it all started. You are right. We have Lake Erie right behind us here. You're originally from Ohio, right? Give everybody a little background, because a lot of people, probably because it's been that long ago, they don't even realize that's kind of phase one of your career.
It is. Born and raised in a small town, northeast Ohio, called Diamond, Ohio. And it's one of those incredible rural communities where if you blink at the flashing red light, you miss the whole town. We were about an hour inland from Lake Erie. The nearest port was Ashtabula, Ohio. And my father started a charter boat there the year I graduated high school, 1988. And I literally cut my teeth on the fishing industry running a charter boat with my dad on the central basin of Lake Erie. And that's before trolling was cool, Ross. You can remember those days. Everybody was chucking the big weight forward spinners or finding a way to drag crawler harnesses using the wind as your only way to propel yourself. And we were out there trolling with the downriggers and the dipsy divers and the wire line planer boards, trying to make something cool that no one really wanted to be part of. And we all see where that went. I mean, it exploded in the walleye fishing world and moved inland. But yeah, that's where I started. And it's been a long time since I've called that home. I've lived in the Dakotas now since 1996 is when I moved away. So half my life has now been in North Dakota. And I love it there too, but I sure miss the old wide open big blue marble of Lake Erie. It's always fun to get back there.
Well, and backing up a little bit, because a lot of people listening to this may not know, I don't know if I would call Ashtabula area kind of the eastern end of the Central Basin maybe, or western end of the Eastern Basin. But, to your point of the trolling thing and thinking back again 20 plus years, trolling over there, I mean, casting weight forwards, I mean, it absolutely works. But in the western end, where most of the guys are doing it, you're generally going to be, let's say, less than 30 feet of water. Where you were talking about, and where your dad's business and where you cut your teeth, you're probably 70, 80 or more. Is that? I'm pretty close, right?
I would say on average, we were fishing 70 to 75 feet of water. But you got to remember, back in the late 80s, Ross, the lake wasn't really clean. If you could see down 2 feet, maybe 3, that was a long way. So those fish, although you were in 75 or 80 feet of water, were still very attainable with a weight forward spinner. The problem was getting on them and staying on them. You didn't have a reef to drift over. You didn't have a monument to line yourself up with. One of the biggest jokes was, where are you catching them at? And the guys would say, straight out from the power plant. Well, heck, you could be in Erie, Pennsylvania.
You could be in Toronto.
And you're right in front of the power plant still. So it was challenging. It was fun. But the battle was always there between the Central Basin guys that stayed there all the time and the transient charter captains that started to develop. The Erie Deary Dans would come over from the islands when fishing got tough, and they would come try to cast weight forwards where everyone else was trolling. And man, were there some really, really interesting and sometimes very heated discussions over a picnic table and six-pack about who could kick whose backside across the lake, trolling or casting. And little did I know, at age 18, 19, 20 years old, I was watching history be made right before my eyes. I mean, Dan Galvencia, the inventor of the Erie Deary, boat was docked right next to my dad's every summer for 2 months. And man, again, looking back, not knowing what kind of fishing legends you were around, it was kind of a neat experience.
You're exactly right. I mean, a lot of the guys, and we'll talk about them as we get on, but like Bruce Sampson, a mutual friend and business partner, really,
Right.
we knew him when he was still a medical doctor, and now he's basically kind of, I would call it semi-retired, and Dr. Sonar, and, these things have developed where, he's your buddy Bruce in fishing tournaments, and now all of a sudden he's kind of created his own little niche, kind of like we have, but
Right.
I guess backing up again, because a lot of people, that aren't familiar with these things, so we just kind of give them the whole piece of the pie is, the Western Basin Lake Erie is probably 90% of their charter captains, or for his
Correct.
number of sport fishing boats. But where Johnny was at, you were there because that's where you live and that's where you're doing your business and living. But a lot of these guys, they actually shifted their boats down because the fishing, at some point in the summer with the water temperature, the bait fish, just like everything else, instead of migrating out to deep humps or whatever on your little lake that you're fishing, these fish move 150 miles. And they're chasing food or whatever it may be. And to your point of, just trying to stay in these things, they may only be 10 or 15 feet down and you could catch them in theory because that lure can be counted down. These fish move miles per day, and they go north or east or west or south. And even with the best network, it's really difficult. I mean, it's truly the needle in a haystack. I mean, that open water stuff, I mean, I call my business Bigwater. That's the podcast is Bigwater. That's what I like doing. But I'll tell you what, it sure is intimidating. I don't care how long you do it or you think you're good at it. I mean, you miss it?
Yeah, I do. I do. I don't want to say it's easier when you got structure, but kind of. Devil's Lake is full of flooded roads, sunken humps, weed edges. And if they're not on one piece of structure, you go to the next. The central basin of Lake Erie, you went to where you caught them the day before, and you literally randomly threw a dart at a map and said, okay, we're going to troll this direction today and hope that's the direction they went. And if they didn't go that direction, you kind of went back to where you started and went another direction. Again, like you said, Ross, the networks weren't there in the 80s and 90s when I was back there. There were very few guys doing it. We didn't even have the technology that we have today. I remember using a Loran Steed for my navigation with 2 sets of numbers, right? There was no charter plot. There was no screen. There was definitely no contour map. You had no clue. You just kind of went out there and drove around and looked with your sonar for a while and then put it on plane and then looked with sonar. And when you marked fish, you tried to catch them. And something about being out on that great big blue circle of water, not seeing land, and being able to get away from it all for a while was a lot of fun.
I don't know, it's changed so much. I thought about when you were talking about the heated discussions at the picnic tables, and I don't know that that's changed much, except for now they're not at the picnic tables as much as on forums and Facebook pages probably now. But these people, man, the casters are the casters and the trollers are the trollers. And there's a handful that overlap, the guys will do both. I mean, I do both with my business, but the reality is it's like oil and vinegar. I mean, it just, right? Or oil and water, more like it. But I said that before. Oil and water, that would be the case.
Right.
But, I mean, how many times too a guy just, a caster will stop in front of a troller and just stop because he sees you catching fish, and the guy's got to do it 90
Well, and a lot of times, Ross, they did it on purpose.
Oh,
Back in the day, there was a line pretty much just east of Kelly's Island, and if you went west of that, you were expected to cast.
So, Johnny, the decision to move to Devil's Lake, like, was that well thought out? Is that a family thing, or was that the hot commonplace? Or
it was far from thought out, Ross. That's for sure. So now you're asking me to get into my personal life on a podcast, and like you said, I don't pull punches, so I'll tell you the story. I actually met a gal traveling as a young man across the country from North Dakota. I'll be the first one to admit, being a young single guy traveling the country alone was a lot of fun. For all the reasons you can imagine that it was a lot of fun. And I had a lot of fun and met a gal that stuck a little more than some of the other people I met along the way. And we started communicating long distance, blah, blah, blah. One thing led to the other. Next thing you know, I moved to North Dakota and we got married. We didn't stay married all that long, 4 years, for all the right reasons and all the wrong reasons. Marriages last or don't last, and that one didn't. But now I had moved to North Dakota. I had started to establish myself in that area as a fishing name. I had some TV gigs going. I had some radio gigs going, some magazine things going. Really didn't want to walk away from that. Lived at Lake Sakakawea while I was married. Kind of felt weird staying at the resort that your ex-family owned. So I found the next closest place to fish in North Dakota, and that was Devil's Lake. And quite honestly, that's how I ended up there. I didn't
think that's where we were going.
Yeah.
I didn't think that's where we were going, but okay.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about Devil's Lake. Nothing at all. I obviously had heard about it. I had fished from shore there once or twice. I was in a boat with a friend one day before I moved there. But the lake was flooding, which some people may or may not know about. But Devil's Lake, since I moved there, is probably 50% bigger than it was when I moved there. So I was getting a lot of publicity for flooding. The flooding was making the fishing better. The community was starting to promote the outdoors more. And I just said, hey, what a neat place. And that was in 2000, so 20 years ago now, that I moved to Devil's Lake, North Dakota, and have a home there now with a new family since then, and 4 great stepdaughters that are grown up and gone off to college and have careers, and even a couple grandkids now there in Devil's Lake. So
Grandpa Johnny, I like it.
I don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
So is it an exaggeration to say that literally Devil's Lake, as it flooded, it ate up towns? I mean, because I know there's tons of roadbeds. I mean, I can remember different literally towns, like stuff underwater, right?
Yes, correct. There's high school football fields. There's businesses. There's building foundations, flooded roads, bridges, farm equipment, you name it. Anything you would expect to see above water in North Dakota, I can show you underwater in Devil's Lake. In the late 90s, before the flooding started, the lake was only 40,000 acres, and at its peak, it was 210,000 acres of water. So we've backed off a little bit now. They're saying it's right in that 180,000 acre range, but still, that's 5 times what it was when it was at its smallest. So you can only imagine. It's about 30 feet deeper now than it was then. So 30 feet of extra water. It's big.
With all that machinery and all that stuff, it's a good place to go learn your hummingbird mega imaging, huh?
Oh man, night imaging. Oh, you want to see some screenshots? I got screenshots, man. It's pretty cool. And quite honestly, Ross, a lot of my guide days, after you're done putting the fish in the boat and you've got a limit and you've thrown back enough fish that people are kind of tired of catching them, I'll literally just go for a cruise to show people things on side imaging. They really get a kick out of it. You know, it usually starts out with, does it really look like the magazines and the TV shows? And I'm like, oh yeah, it looks just like that. And you drive them by something and they're like, oh, look, it's a car, it's a tractor, it's a whatever. And if they can figure it out without me telling them, then you know the technology works.
Yeah, it's funny you should say it, because I've done the same thing with like shipwrecks on Lake Erie, and we certainly don't have the stuff that you have, but it is so cool. I mean, it's like I'm like a little schoolgirl with this stuff. I just am so, I mean, to see the ribs on each individual of a shipwreck that's a couple hundred years old is just amazing to me. I don't know. I don't know how they do it, but I guess if you can put a man on the moon.
Right.
At any rate. So obviously the move to North Dakota didn't hurt you. I mean, the reality is it took you in a whole different direction, but I mean, heck, you're in the North Dakota Fishing Hall of Fame. Obviously, you've done a bunch out there. You've built a heck of a guide service. If you're fishing Devil's Lake and you don't know who Johnnie Candle is, probably ain't been there very long. So,
yeah, it's been a good move. Love it out there, and like I said, I hope to stick around for a lot longer.
And I think you're kind of like me, that we do a lot of the same things with our business. I mean, yeah, we guide, we fish some tournaments, we do this and that, but really we've taken, me and you have actually done some schools together. I know you and Bruce do a lot of those together. The reality is to make a living in the fishing industry. I mean, give guys a little bit of an insight to that, because I think a lot of people, when they watch, Bill Dance or they see Kevin Van Dam or something, they have this perception of like, casting a line to make a living. And I think you're probably going to say the same thing that I would, and that there's not much that could be farther from the truth. Your early days getting your name out there, that cements your ability to maybe make this step, but not to actually do it, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It actually hit me at a very young age, running the charter boat with my dad during college and shortly after high school. You find out right away that fishing business isn't fishing business. It's a people business, or to take it a step further, it's a relationship business. many, many times you'd go out and maybe not fill the cooler up with fish on a charter or a guide trip, but yet the customers came back. And you're thinking, boy, why would you come back to fish with us? We caught 14 walleye in 9 hours today. That wasn't all that good. And when they tell you, you know what, we didn't catch a lot of fish, but we laughed all day. We had fun. You taught us how to run a downrigger. We'd never seen a dipsy diver work before. You showed us how the GPS worked or how the chart plotter worked or whatever. And that was just as fun as catching fish. It hits you pretty square in the head that it's not always about putting fish in the boat. Now, don't get me wrong. Having some good tournament finishes along the way and was fortunate enough to win a world championship, as you mentioned before, that's helped a lot. But if you look on my Facebook page, you'll notice that I don't list myself under the sports person category or the public figure category. It says teacher next to my name. And that's really the role of cross that I have found that's helped me in my business plan is when I started taking the attitude that I'm going to share my knowledge with as many people as I can. That's what moved me up the ladder when it came to sponsorships and cementing my spot in the industry. And I think you've done the same thing, right? You're a writer, you're a communicator, you're doing podcasts like this. It's not just about filling a cooler with fish and holding up big fish for pictures. That's the fun part of the job, don't get me wrong. But man, when you start sharing your knowledge with others so they can get better at fishing, I think that's really helped both of us in the business part of this game.
Well, ironically, it was Al Linder. And again, I was a fairly young pup, go figure. And he said to me, Bub, you need to get into the learning things. These guys need the education. And for me, it was kind of like you. There wasn't, as many guys probably in the Dakotas that were doing what you're doing. That may sound funny,
right.
But they're doing guiding, they're doing terms, but they weren't going that angle. And it was the same thing on the Great Lakes where there weren't guys, and I figure out real quick, I'm like, hey, this tournament deal, if I was able to make a name by doing well early with that, but you can't make hardly any money. And I know people are going to argue this or whatever, but I'm just going to tell you straight up, and you're living proof of this too, right? Like,
right.
You cannot make a living doing that. I don't care how much you win. It costs so much and takes so much time. And I learned real fast. I'm like, instead of hiding everything, which is what tournament fishermen do. Now it's much more difficult nowadays with live broadcasts and everything than the old days when you were fishing them and the results were put into a magazine 6 months later, not a Facebook post 2 hours later. The reality of what this has become is you're going to educate somebody or you're going to be the secret guy, and the secret's going to come out anyhow. So you might as well jump on and just like me and you, we both work with Hummingbird, for example.
Right.
And while I've worked with a bunch of companies, and I'm sure you echo this, you go and stand at a sports show, you'll talk to a million people, and they're going to tell you they know more about everything. They could be talking to Kevin Van Dam about bass fishing, and they know more than he does. But the one thing that's universal that people just seem to kind of know, like, I don't know shit about this, is probably electronics.
Right.
And that's one thing that, obviously our buddy Bruce, he's done that with the Dr. Sonar and stuff. You do teaching your Hummingbird classes and doing the things, traveling all the different places that you do. And it's the same thing with me. Like, I take people out on the boat and I show them how to use it because it's amazing. And just simple things like sensitivity settings when they think that they're on these giant walleyes and they're on white bass, or, it's the things that we think are little things, but in reality, they're really big things because they can be fixed so simply. There's some things that just take a lot of time and effort. And I think you'll probably agree. So many of these things don't take that. But if you don't know, you don't know. What do they say? You don't know what you don't know, right?
Don't know what you don't know, right? Exactly. Yeah, so again, it's education seems to work well. As long as other guys don't all jump in, and you know how that goes, Ross. We've seen that in what we do. What is that? Flattery is the sincerest form of, or imitation, that's it. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I think we're both seeing that. Every time I turn around, there's someone else doing this seminar across the street from where I'm at, or someone else trying to do an on-the-water school or a university like you and I and Doc have done together, or somebody else trying to copy your YouTube video, or who knows what, right? But I'm just going to keep plugging away and doing my thing, and I'm turning the hill now, right, or cresting the hill. I turned 50 this year, so I don't have to do it a whole lot more. I'm just going to hang in there and try to gut out another 10 or 15 years, and we'll let the young guys catch me down at the bottom.
I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there because neither one of us pull any punches, but I can remember, I don't know if I'd rattled the bear cage because I think in our, I say our age, but more so than when we were in our 20s, it doesn't rattle us as much where you want to go punch somebody. But I can remember calling you or texting you or something relatively not that long ago and saying, hey, are you doing this thing? Because there's somebody that used your business name for their thing.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I was given a seminar not that long ago, and it was a very unique seminar topic that I try to do these things so that when somebody sits down, they're not like, "Yep, been there, done that," or listen to Johnny and Bruce and Tom and Billy and everybody else give these before. And sure enough, I'm working another sports show, and another guy in my area decided to literally copy the seminar. He must have been taking pictures or something throughout the seminar and just did it his own. And you kind of go, Mom said don't say anything if you got nothing nice to say. And how do you even just like, come on, dude?
Right.
Really?
Right. Well, I've had to stop guys. I've had to stop guys pulling video cameras out, going to record the whole seminar. And I'm like, what's that for? Well, I might want to watch it again at home. And they said, well, I'd kind of not like to see you record my whole seminar because what's keeping you from hitting the upload button and putting it on YouTube next week? Right. This is how I make my living. And I can't just let you sit here and record my seminar. Some guys get it. Other people get a little upset, but can't just give it away for free.
So,
it is a bit
funny sidebar. I don't know if you're superstitious or not, but my producer's sitting a couple feet away from me here, and he's a producer on my TV show, and he's eating a banana. And when we were in the boat and we had catastrophic stuff going on, and there was a whole, I'm going to call it a bushel of bananas in my cooler, and I threw them over the side. And he was like, literally, he like driving home that night. He's like, dude, what are you doing, man? You're such a dick. And I'm like, no, they're bad luck in a boat, because of this and that the whole spider story.
Exactly. Yep.
And he was like, he was calling. Now he's eating another one. So apparently, I don't know if this is only if it applies to podcasts or if we have to be in the boat. But he's definitely still eating a banana
And loving it.
and he's loving it. He says. So I don't know if you have any superstitions like that.
No, I try not to. Although I was the kid in high school football that wore the same socks for every game and never washed them in between. So maybe I am superstitious.
Hey, when you're dating Matt Davis's wife, you can do whatever you need to do.
I did put clean socks on for the homecoming dance, though. I did.
That's good. That's good. So, again, back to it's too funny. I mean, where do you even go with that? But so, again, giving these people a little bit of idea. I mean, the stuff that you do. I mean, obviously, I know a lot of what you do, but because it's very similar to what I do. I think, before we even started kind of working some business stuff together, we kind of both probably stood back and like, man, we really do a lot of the same stuff. And that's probably why we get along so well. But when you're not guiding or physically casting a line, give me I know this will be different throughout the months, but give me an idea of what goes on. What do you need to do to...
Like a typical day when I'm not fishing? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
When you're just not physically casting a line fishing. Because I think a lot of people, they say to me, like, so what do you do in the winters, man?
Right.
I'm like, I don't know, work 70 hours a week or more?
Right. Well, I'll give you an idea of what my last month has been like. I haven't slept in my own bed for 30 days. I won't get home until Sunday night. I've got from Iowa, between now and Sunday, I will go to Billings, Montana, and back to my home. In the last 30 days, I've been in, I've been in Seattle, I've been in Atlanta twice, I've been in Dallas, Texas, I've been in Portland, Oregon, and when I left Dallas the other day, pulling a boat through the northern plains in the middle of winter, mind you, I stopped in Omaha, Sioux City, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and then a stop here in Iowa tonight for a seminar where I'm speaking now. So that's winter. Winter is sport show, trade show, club seminar, visit a couple retail outlets. Shields is a big sponsor, so I'm busy there. And in between all of that, Ross, as you know, if you're a businessman and you're getting paid, then they want to know what you're doing for them. So it's send a report to this company, send a report to that company, fill out an expense report to get reimbursed for what you spent to go to this trade show, do this paperwork. And oh, by the way, we're still responsible for X number of social media posts, podcasts like we're doing right now, video shoots, setting up guide trips, booking this, booking that. I'm right now making plans for ICAST, and that's not till July. But if I don't start making plans now, the next thing you know, it's going to be 2 weeks before ICAST, and you don't have a plane ticket bought. So yeah, it's absolutely mind numbing. I can easily stay busy 40 hours a week and never leave a desk because people want reports. They want stories. They want, what's the buzzword? Content, right, Ross? How many times do you get the word content thrown at you? Yeah, we need more content.
The guy sitting in front of me says more content. My content,
Yeah.
I actually have, this is where this has gone. I've hired a content manager.
There you go. There you go.
You know, I mean,
Right.
and that speaks to the importance of it. And I think the thing that people sometimes now, again, with some of the younger guys that they need to listen to, maybe they need somebody like Kevin Van Dam or Gerald Swindle to tell them instead of me or you, but is
Right.
you've got to have, just like any job, like I said, I tell people, back fishing out of it. The guys that are listening to this that want to do this or are trying to get into it, forget we're fishing for a second. And if you were an accountant or something, if you can't do the books, it doesn't matter what you can't jump ahead. You know what I mean? You've got to have the foundation to be able to do these things. So when you're simply at a sports show, your experience and ability to talk about lead core trolling or Lake Erie fishing or slip bobber fishing is super important that you have that resume, because you never know what's going to pop up, and that makes you a well-rounded guy for, you know, Shields on your shirt or Lund boats or whatever. You know, all of those things just really, really matter, because I think a lot of where our importance, because we work for a lot of the same companies, is, and a lot that aren't, but, you know, product design, feedback, and there's a lot of guys that are really good fishermen. I know I work with a couple companies where they're like, you know, they get some of these guys in there and they tell them, well, so-and-so said that this thing's great. And I go and tell them, hey, this thing's a piece of shit. They want to know that behind closed doors, because this isn't a product that is on the market. They want to know, they want to get the problems out beforehand, right?
Exactly.
And that's a lot of what we do. People all the time say, oh man, it's so great you get to try all these new products and everything. I'm like, not really, because 75% of the stuff that we're doing never makes the big show.
Exactly.
I'm like, I've
got piles of lures in my garage that never made it, or made it 4 years, 5 years, 10 years later. The Berkeley Flicker Shad is one that I think is kind of cool, because I've got prototypes from long before the, let's say, the people that took credit for designing that lure were even involved with the company that sells the lure. So it's kind of fun in a way to see that. It's kind of neat to know that you did have a part in that. But like you said, it's also frustrating. Sometimes they come across a product that's really, really great that never makes it. Other times you see a failure in front of you and try to tell them that, and you don't get through. So the product does make it, doesn't work well. But yeah, the job has got so many facets, Ross. It's unbelievable. And I think that's why we love it so much. You don't have the same day twice in a row.
No.
No matter if you think you're going to have the same day twice in a row, you don't.
No.
Right? Well, I'm going to guide every day for the next 7 days. You tell me the last time 2 guide days were exactly the same. It just doesn't happen.
The weather and the people eliminate that right off the bat. But
Exactly.
yeah, you know, and I think back to your thing about like the lures, to me, and I doubt you're going to disagree with this, the lures are the easy thing, because you take them off, you put them away. The stuff that's frustrating is when you're doing accessories or electronics or motors or things like that. It's really cool, and it's obviously a huge part. When those don't function, it's a bad deal for us. When it's a shitty lure, you just take it off and you put another one on, right?
Right.
And you can carry boxes of those.
If your motor doesn't run or your depth finder doesn't turn on, though, then makes it hard to do the rest of your job.
And again, the amount of time that, you know, we spend doing these things with the various companies is really staggering, because these guys want to make sure that things are thoroughly tested, and it's not the cool thing that everybody thinks it is, in my opinion. Now, lures may be a little different. All that other stuff, you just go, ugh, you're the bad guinea pig, essentially.
Yeah. I got to do this again, really?
and I realize, you know, even like us getting a new boat every year, people look at me like, oh my God, and me and you, I mean, again, we're jaded after 2 decades plus of doing it, but when you've got to rig a new boat, and I'm always down to a deadline and making sure everything works, because there's always bugs. I mean, this is not like going and buying a new car. There are always bugs, and there's a lot of different manufacturers that go in, and your batteries and your electronics and your mounts, this is behind, or this isn't available yet. It seems like every year something is behind in production that we need on our boat, and you're putting it on at the hotel of the first stop of your tournament or promotion.
Yeah. Under your boat cover in a driving rainstorm. I've done that more than once in my life.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I'm just like, ugh. Ugh.
Right.
But as these things evolve, it's just like you said, we're sitting here doing a podcast. Like I like this stuff, but there's a lot of guys, and there's people that I've asked about being on here, and I'll say some of them said no because they are too afraid to get on something where it's like recorded, and then there's other people that just probably, I don't know, I don't want to say they're not good at it, but they don't want to take the time to do these things, and they don't understand that all of these things are so important. I mean, is this podcast today the end of the world for either one of us? Absolutely not. But when you put 40, 50 things like this together, all of a sudden now it gets good for the people that you're working with, that you're talking and you're promoting.
Well, anytime you want to chat, Ross, just give me a call because this is fun.
I mean, we do it anyway. We joke that, when I said, hey, do you want to be on a podcast? And I don't think I got out of my mouth, and you were like, absolutely. And then your exact words, I mean, almost verbatim were, do you realize we've done about 1,000 podcasts together? We just didn't record them.
Right. Exactly. We have.
I told another guy that I said, I think podcasts are the modern day campfire.
Kind of. They are.
It's kind of like when you're sitting around with your dad and on the picnic table with these old charter guys. If somebody would have been recording that, this would be gold.
Could have sold it for millions of dollars. Millions.
As a kid, I mean, literally in my teens, I used to travel with Gary Roach on some of the professional walleye trail stuff, and the stuff that I soaked up, man. I mean, that's just obviously the YouTube and video stuff wasn't around or isn't like it is now, but I literally would have been set for life if I could have just canned some of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because those guys are just a whole different ball of wax. I think you'd agree. It's so much easier now to get promotions and to get things, where when you were like Gary Roach back in the day, and you did it, and we'll talk about that quickly. A Gary Roach type of guy, he was renting, I remember him telling me the story in person, that he had like a car top boat and he rented an engine, I think is what it was, as a guide. He's renting a motor and putting on top of like a station wagon and sleeping on the back of their truck and going from tackle shore like you're doing. But I mean, sleeping in the back of the truck, I mean, nowadays I don't think that, again, that's why he's a Gary Roach, but I don't think there's that many people that are willing to put up with what Gary Roach and Johnnie Candle did. No,
I don't think so. I started my career in an 18-foot Lund SV. There's not even a flat floor in a Lund SV. It's just the ribs that hold the boat together. I literally cut one of the bench seats out and put a live well in it. I had clamp on swivel chairs on another wooden bench seat. Built my own front casting deck in it because it didn't come with one. So that's what I started in. I slept in the slide-in pickup truck pop-up camper for the first 2 years I was on the tour.
And that's what I want to hear about, because I think these are the best stories. Or that was definitely on my mental list of, hey, Johnny sleep in the back of his truck. I remember seeing a Gerald Swindle video, and he says, because I think of like the younger guys that are even younger than me, is like Brandon Palaniuk. He kind of came to fame by, hey, I'm sleeping in the back of, he called it his Tundra Suites or whatever. I remember Gerald Swindle saying, me and Skeet Reese used to sleep in the back of our truck when it wasn't cool.
Exactly. But it's what you did, Ross. I mean, I graduated college 23 years old, and I had a dream, and I was going to follow everything I could to get it done. And quite honestly, I didn't know what I was missing, right? I never had a 2-week paycheck. Obviously, I had odd jobs going through school. I knew what it was like to pay rent, but I didn't know what it was like to be ahead of the game ever in life. I never had extra money. So it really didn't feel like I was doing something that the world thought was not what you were supposed to do. You made $100, you paid an entry fee, you scraped up enough money for gas and bait, and you went and fished a tournament. And if you did well, you took that money and went and fished another one. And if not, you went home and guided for 2 weeks so you could pay for the next tournament. And it's just what you did. You slept where you had to sleep. You ate the meals that you could afford, and you got it done. Now, looking back on it now, it's like, holy crap, it sure is nice stopping at a hotel when you're tired instead of getting out and crawling in the back of a pickup truck and cranking up the topper so you can have enough room to stand up and crawl into your bunk. But again, it was just part of getting where I had to go. And I guess I never really thought twice about it.
Well,
But
you're
looking
young,
back
you're
on
young and dumb, and just you go,
sacrifice.
you just go.
Right.
I
Yep.
I can think of like a guy in Alaska that I fished with up around the Arctic Circle and asking him about this and that, and I was just blown out of the water. He didn't know what the Kardashians was. Now I thought that was awesome, but when you don't know, like, just to your point, I can remember early on a girlfriend, and she was like, "How do you watch this TV?" This is when the flat screen stuff kind of started coming out, and I had just this crappy TV because guys like us weren't really watching TV anyhow.
Nope.
And
No.
it again, you remember going over her place and watching a movie on this thing on her nice big flat screen thing, and I'm like, oh my god, now my TV is really shitty. But when you don't know, you don't know.
Yep. Exactly.
And I almost just I wonder I never even thought about it in this way honestly until right now when you said it. I've never had a quote unquote real job. I've been in the fishing
Right.
industry in some way, shape, or form, whether it was selling boats or whatever. From college, I had a few odd jobs here and there when we're going through, just like yourself, and we really have a very similar deal. And people that have had to have a normal real life, or if you had 3 kids by age 25, you're probably not going to be able to do it. I'm not saying you can't,
Right.
but I think you almost have to have those kind of steps in the journey, don't you?
Exactly. I remember, when you talk about not knowing what you don't have, first national championship tournament I ever fished in, I started out with the North American Walleye Anglers Tour, and I'm sure you remember them, Ross, because some of the early tournaments were right back there on Lake Erie.
On Toledo,
They
killed 20 people
Yep.
coming back that one tournament.
Exactly. So they were a competitor to the PWT. They kind of branched off and said, we can do it better. And long story short, found out they couldn't, but it doesn't matter. So I make the first national championship tournament I ever fished in, which was my second year on the tour at age 24, which is kind of a big deal. I was the youngest guy there. Most of the people I was fishing against were definitely old enough to be my father. I'm sitting in my little tiny boat. I've got all these rods strewn everywhere because there is no rod locker, right? This is a bench seat boat that I've converted to a tournament boat.
Now, you were still in Ohio then, right?
Yep, was still in Ohio then, correct. And Bobby Loomis, the nephew of Gary Loomis, but was working for G. Loomis Fishing Rods, walks by me on the dock while I'm rigging up to go practice. And I don't know who he is. I don't have a clue. And he walks by and looks at my boat and kind of gives me a, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, yeah, pretty good. Yourself? Oh, not too bad. And he just keeps walking. Gets to the end of the dock, and he comes back and he stops and he looks in my boat and he makes a very puzzled looking face. And he looks at the boat again and he looks at me. And I'm like, can I help you with something? And he says, you got here fishing with that shit? And that's exactly what he said to me. And I'm like, I don't quite understand what you're getting at. And he said, there's not 2 rods and reels in that boat that match. And I looked at him and I said, do they have to? I didn't know they were supposed to match. It's the rods and reels I owned. Some of them were from when I was 9 years old, right? I mean, these are old fiberglass spinning rods with Mitchell 300s, right? The old black ones that sounded like a coffee grinder. But it's what I had. It's what I had. And it was good enough to get to the national championship tournament. And after he looked at those rods and watched me rig them up for a while, his exact words were, you must be a pretty damn good fisherman if you got here fishing with that. And he gave me his business card and said, give me a call. I'll make sure next year you can fish with some good equipment. But I didn't realize that everybody else had 4 bottom bouncer rods that were identical. And I didn't know that everyone else had 4 jigging rods that were identical. And I definitely didn't know that all your trolling rods were supposed to be the same. Now, granted, once I made them that way, was it easier to catch a few fish? Yeah, it was. You didn't have to, you pick up a different jig rod and it felt the same as the last one, so you weren't trying to remember what a bite felt like. But I didn't know. And, thank goodness I met Bobby Loomis, and he got me started in the right direction with a rod sponsor, and things kind of rolled from there. That was one of the first sponsors I ever had.
So you were with G. Loomis then in the early days, huh?
I was, just for a couple years until some other opportunities came along. Ended up fishing for Bass Pro Shops in the early days when they had their walleye angler catalog, and they kind of took over the Loomis thing, and that turned into not having a walleye angler catalog. As you know, you don't really get attached to some companies in your life because it just leads to heartbreak. But yeah, so I did fish Loomis rods for a short time early in my career.
A funny story that I don't think I've ever publicly said. So back when I was in end of high school, early in college, I used to like get like G Loomis clothing for Christmas and stuff. You know what I mean? Like getting hoodies from like my mom would get me or
Right.
whatever. And I used to buy the blanks. A buddy of mine was set up, and he was getting them wholesale. And I used to buy however many of them, and I would build like two, and then keep the third one. So I'd build
Got
two, or I'd build three, but I'd build two and sell them to buddies or whatever the deal was, so that I could. So I had, because again the same thing. And even then, G Loomis rods were expensive. And so
Oh yeah.
here I am, buying these blanks that even 20 years ago were a couple $100 just for the blank.
Right.
Finished
Exactly.
rods, whatever it is, $300 or something, I don't know. And so I could have good stuff. And it's just funny how the world works, because now I'm sponsored by G Loomis, and
Right.
Gary Loomis has nothing to do with the company, and it's changed
Nothing.
hands 2 or 3 times since. The only thing that's the same is the name, I think, but they still make a hell of a rod, and it's just funny
Oh yeah.
how things kind of come full circle. You're, like you said, you're using what you got, or I figured out, hey, I can build these rods. It's not that difficult, and
Right.
probably used too much time up doing it, but nevertheless. So
Yeah, but back in those days, Ross, that's all you had was time. You didn't have money.
well, but
Had-
again, I feel like even like talking to the producer, it's like sometimes I talk like I'm 90 years old doing this, but when this is all you've done for 20 some years, back when you're 22, 23, 24, like you said, and you're guiding, you're doing this, you come home from guiding now, at least me in 40s, you're in 50, and you're like,
Yep.
you want to be done. You return the stuff you got to do, and you're destroyed. And back then it was like, all right, let's run 2 trips, or hey, what are we
Right.
what are we going to go do now? And
Right.
life has
Right.
a way of kind of working on you a little bit. I think living on Lake Erie, I think I'd be 6'9" if I lived out someplace else, taking the beating that I have. So.
Most likely.
And I can remember a story that you told somewhere, that, I mean, it's a short one, but it's kind of just fits into this whole mold of about the money thing. When you cashed a check, and if someone had said, well, where are you going? You're like, well, I'm going to go sleep in the bank parking lot. I mean,
I didn't have a credit card, Ross. There was no credit card company that would give me a credit card back in those days. So I lived on the money in my pocket. And it was a tournament at Lake Sharp in South Dakota. And the check was not a good check. It was for finishing dead last. The North American Walleye Anglers actually gave the person that finished dead last an award. They call it the Red Lantern Award, because back in the days when a train had a caboose, they had hung a red lantern on the caboose. And I had some engine trouble, and I didn't make way in the second day. I finished the tournament, but I was so far out of it that I didn't do very well. And the tournament ended, and I got my check for $500, and I reached in my pocket to go home, and I had $22 in my pocket. Well, from South Dakota to Ohio in a 1974 Chevy pickup truck with a 454 cubic inch engine, you weren't getting far with $22. The option was either have money wired to me or sleep in the bank parking lot till Monday so I could cash a check and drive home to Ohio. So that's what I did. I pulled my truck and boat in the bank parking lot Saturday night at whatever time the weigh-in was over, and I sat in the bank parking lot until Monday morning at 8, walked in the door and cashed a check and put fuel in a truck, drove back home. So again, got to do what you got to do. And are they things that you're really, really proud of? Not really. I mean, there's a lot of those stories, Ross,
yeah,
where
it's a foundation
you're
of your
borrowing
deal,
money
though.
from a guy, or you're doing this or doing that. But I made it, and here I am. Like you said, it's been 93 till now, so 23, 24 years that I've been in a truck, on the road, doing my thing, getting by, and I think it's turning out okay.
I can remember the early days when I was I think still in high school, traveling with Gary Roach and Dave Hansen and some of those guys to the PWTs. And I mean, there was guys at almost the end of every event back in those early days of walleye fishing. I mean, obviously the Linders were trying to make walleye fishing what bass fishing was, but they've made it a lot bigger than it would have been. But it's still, you don't have that reach. You don't have as many people. They're not in all 50 states. The money's not there. But I mean, I can remember in those I say early days, but earlier days, where those guys, I mean, almost every event, and I'm sure you've seen this, guys were selling planer boards because the next event you didn't need them, and they were just trying to get gas money home.
Oh, yeah.
And
Exactly.
maybe it wasn't planer boards that tournament, it was something else, but it was something to get gas money to go home because they didn't get that check, even though wasn't the Red Lantern or any check, because they needed to get home. And that's kind of the sad part of the sport. And again, when you see somebody like, one of the big name bass guys, and he's got $5 million in career earnings. The reality is there's just as many guys starving in the bass world doing this that,
For sure.
Yeah, the MasterCard, that's the joke. MasterCard and Visa are their sponsors. And, they, in some cases, unfortunately bankrupt their family trying to, to keep the dream alive. So
it happens. And I relate those early days a lot to rodeo, right? And you saw it a lot. There were a lot of guys, and I did it myself. Sometimes instead of going home, you started looking at bait shop billboards to see if there was a local tournament that you could team up with another pro and pay $150 entry fee and try to steal $2,000 from some local bar tournament instead of going home. And it's kind of how rodeo cowboys did it before the PBR was a big deal and the national rodeo finals in Vegas were a big deal. Those guys did the same thing, right? They did a big giant roping, and then they hit 3 little podunk cow towns in between the next one. You might not have made your money at the national derbies, but they were better than the local guys, and they'd win a couple $100 here or there, and that's what we did.
I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard it put that way, but you're absolutely right. Like comedians do the same thing. They may be playing this big event, but they'll go do these little college places because they're a bigger name than what they would be elsewhere, and they're making just enough, and they tune in. It's nothing else. It's kind of like that. You go try things, you keep your game going. I mean, that's just like us as guides. Just because you're not guiding doesn't mean you can't go. You can't. You've got to stay on top of it. I mean, it's an ever changing craft.
Right.
But I think
I'm on the water every day. If I'm not traveling somewhere, I'm on the water every day. Much like I know you, if you can be, you're on the water every day. It's what we do, and you have to do it.
Yeah, Mother Nature around my neck of the woods has a way of kicking me in the butt. So you've maybe not every day, but you're working towards that, right? But I think the one thing that some of the stories I know that I've heard you tell through the years, and I think I could probably tell you a few along the same lines, is a lot of our stuff involves breakdowns.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember you were telling me one over in Ashtabula. The reality, I guess, jumping ahead is we don't have as many of those. I think we both run Mercury Verados and Pro XSs, and I think the equipment's way better, like in kicker engines in particular. I mean, I can remember, again, I'm not that old relative when I'm not trying to be like the old man here, but I can still remember having to have a 5-gallon gas tank bungee corded to the back because we had 2 strokes and we needed to mix the gas, right? And now you go into the early series of what was the Pro Kicker, and now I'm running a fuel injected Pro Kicker that makes my original Pro Kicker look like a turd.
Exactly.
And really the same thing with the Verados. I mean, guys were running 90 horse tillers, and now they're running 300 horse tillers. I mean, I'm running a 400 horse on my Ranger this year. And you just, I don't want to curse myself, like knock on some wood somewhere or something, but I really don't have many problems. And I put a lot of hours, a lot of days on them. So I think that's why you don't hear as many of those stories. Because I mean, me and you both could tell the breakdown stories, but most of them are pretty old.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think the one you're talking about, Ross, I was in a tournament. It was out of Fairport Harbor. The whole field went west, and the kid that grew up in Ashtabula went east. Something about feeling comfortable closer to home, I'm sure. Had a really, really good day. It was day 1 or day 2, it doesn't really matter. Got my fish, turned around to come in, and all of a sudden it was an old Mercury Black Max. I'm sure you remember the Black Max motors.
Barely. I'm not as old as you.
Yeah. At this point in my career, I had a big center console, 20-foot center console boat, but no kicker motor, just the main engine. And all of a sudden, it sounds like a Harley Davidson instead of a Mercury motor. I knew exactly what happened. Don't know why I opened the engine cowling, but I did. Like I'm really going to fix the motor out in the middle of Lake Erie.
You still can't fix them nowadays.
But you want to look smart, right? So you're going to open the motor and look at it. I'm starting to look, and here's the engine rod sticking 2 inches out of the engine block. And I'm like, well,
you got any duct tape, Bob?
Yeah, we're done for the day. And the poor guy with me was 74, 75 years old, and we didn't think anything of it because it was a beautiful afternoon and the sun was out, not a whole lot of wind. I'm trying and trying and trying to reach someone from the tournament on the Marine Band radio, and you know how Marine Band radios work. Some days everybody seems to hear you, and when you need them to hear you, no one can hear you. So, oh well, we'll just float around for a while. What can you do? So I keep trying to call and trying to call and trying to call, and finally gets later in the day, and some of the folks that I knew in Ashtabula start showing up for the weekend because it's a Friday evening. At their boats, and they can hear me on their Marine Band radio. So they call me, what's going on? And well, I'm broken down. I need some help. Well, give us some time. We'll come get you. Well, as this is transpiring, the clouds are getting darker and the waves are getting bigger and things are turning bad. And one of my dad's charter buddies says, we're on our way to get you. And they leave the Ashtabula River and get to the Coast Guard station, and the Coast Guard, who has been monitoring these conversations but not saying anything, stops him and says, you're not going to get him. And they're like, why not? And the Coast Guard calls me on the radio and says, they're not coming to get you because of the weather system that's pretty much going to kick your ass in about 20 minutes. We're not going to allow any we're not going to allow any boat out there because we cannot take the chance of risking someone else's lives to save yours. And I said, is it that bad, really? And when the Coast Guard says, yes, it's that bad, really, you need to prepare for the worst. Now, I am a licensed captain at this point in my life, and I knew what to do. I had sea anchors. I put them out. I kept the bow into the wind. But the wind gusts were over 40 miles an hour. It thundered, it lightninged, it hailed. And I'm in a center console boat, unprotected from the elements, with a guy that's 74 years old and had never been on Lake Erie till that tournament. So it was a really, really, really long night. We got back to shore at 4 o'clock in the morning, finally, in Fairport Harbor. The old guy literally kissed the ground when we got on shore. My father was there waiting for me, and the only contact he had with anyone to know where I was with the Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard is a phenomenal, government agency, I guess. They let my dad sit in the Fairport Harbor Coast Guard station and listen to the radio conversations. They would not let him talk to me, and I understand why, but at least he knew I was safe and all that kind of stuff. But
I don't know if
we got back morning and no one was there from the tournament organization, but kind of made me mad because that meant they really didn't care if I made it back to shore or not.
How old were you when this went down?
25.
Yeah.
25 years. Yeah. So
25-year-old Johnny's not as smart as 50-year-old Johnny either. I mean,
no, but Ross, fresh. I got my Coast Guard captain's license when I was 20, and I'll be the first one to admit that stuff's not as fresh in my mind now as it was then. But you knew what to do.
Yeah. Green over white, sailboat at night.
Yeah.
I don't remember half of that either, to be honest with you. But
no, but I mean, it was fresh in my head. And at 25 years old, you feel bulletproof anyways.
Yeah.
I was more.
Yeah. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Sometimes what you don't know actually helps you.
Correct.
So did the Coast Guard come and get you ultimately?
What's that?
Did the Coast Guard come and get you ultimately?
No, Coast Guard did not. They would not. One of my dad's charter buddies came and got me from Ashtabula, drug me to Fairport Harbor, and then drove his boat back to Ashtabula. For those of you that don't know how far that is, that was a pretty good hike. It's got to be, 40 miles one way from Ashtabula to Fairport Harbor, if not further. So he went out in the lake, got me, took me back to the harbor, and then went back to his own harbor. I thanked him dearly. I bought him a whole lot of beer and a whole lot of whiskey for a lot of years after that.
I mean, that's a lot of boat gas right there.
It is.
Yeah, I seem to think it's just funny because I keep thinking about again, when you tell stories, you don't want to hear like, oh, Johnny won this tournament. He just went out to this rock pile and he fished there 3 days in a row, because those are kind of boring. The breakdown ones are great. I remember one vividly, Sault Ste. Marie.
That one was a good one too. Actually, the gentleman's house I'm staying at was my traveling partner back then. Day 3 of a PWT tournament. We were both in the top 10 going out in the morning. I start my big engine and it came uncorked. Optimax motor. It was in that time frame, Ross, we're all too familiar with some issues.
2001 or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, it was right in that area. And I limped back in. The Mercury mechanic was there, and I pulled into the dock and turned the motor off. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I think it came uncorked." He said, "Tilt it up." So I tilted it up, and he looked inside the propeller, and he's literally pulling chunks of metal out of my propeller the size of nickels that are coming through the exhaust and out the propeller. And I said, "I guess I'm done." And he goes, "Hold on a second." I'm like, "You can fix that?" And he goes, "Put the motor down and start it." So I put the motor down and turned the key, and it started. And he said, "If I were you, I'd go fishing. The damage is already done." So I quit.
Note to self, when you don't have trailer support, this is probably not good information to follow.
So I took off and went fishing, and lo and behold, I made it through the day, and I had a phenomenal day. I ended up in third place, which at that time was my best finish ever in a tournament, in a big tournament, a national tournament. So I was excited. When we got a nice limit in the box, and hindsight being 2020, probably should have kept upgrading, but I kept thinking, what if that motor doesn't start? What if that motor doesn't start? So we had a good limit in the box, turned the key, it started. We get back to the weigh-in, and I'm so early they won't let me weigh in my fish. Then they look in the box and say, "Oh, we got to build drama." So they won't let me weigh in. So I'm sitting there tied up to a dock for hours. I weighed my fish, got in the boat to load it on the trailer, turned the key, and it wouldn't turn over. So I literally got the last life out of that outboard motor the day that I moved from, I think, 8th or 9th place to 3rd. So yeah,
oh man,
breakdowns. And at the time, I joked with a lot of my buddies about, boy, I sure seem to fish better when my mind is not on fishing, right? And think
not me, not me.
Get up in the morning and battery charger didn't work, and you're now all day long. You're like, crap, I don't have battery. So what do I do? Well, you go out and improvise, and because you're not thinking about fishing, you fish better. I don't know why that is, but it seems to work that way for me. Every time I have a catastrophic failure, I usually have a pretty good fishing day because I'm worried more about something else than if the fish bite or not.
I'll tell you what, me and you are not on the same page with that. Those are like horror stories. You know, everybody, you come out and, you know, I like to fish slow, and I know you like know that, and generally using my Minn Kota bow mount. And you come out and somebody unplugged your boat or kicked, you know, these things happen, or somebody plugged 3 into one outlet and it tripped the breaker, and now nobody got their boat charged. I mean, these are kind of ongoing realities with stuff, and oh man, it flips me out. For me, it's the opposite. I don't know. You're more of a cool cucumber, I guess, but yeah,
I try to be.
I mean,
I try to be.
Yeah, when you have chunks coming out of your prop exhaust, and what people really need to understand, again, you know, when me and you are talking, again, I've fished the Sioux quite a bit, and me and you know that. To put it in perspective for people that haven't been there, the current is like ripping. I mean, if you have no power, you're gonna end up probably down by me, not too long. You're gonna be down.
Yeah, you'll be in Lake Huron for sure.
Oh, I mean, it rips down there, and when you lose boat control, when you're coming around some of those dayboard markers and things that you need to navigate, you can't be kind of in or off. I mean, on some of the places, you know, other places we fish, you hit a sandbar, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. When you're at Sault Ste. Marie, those channels that those freighters and stuff come down, to say that it's like spot on, I mean, right? I mean, you're in 3 feet of water or you're in the channel, and there is no in between. It's like a bowling alley. And,
exactly.
And so when you lose power there, I mean, kudos to you for even catching fish, because that would be in my mind of, yeah, I'm going to be, you know, in Lake Huron.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, it was a great day. It was one to remember for sure.
So what, I mean, you know, the tournament stories, I don't know if you got any others that stick in there, because I mean, I think we covered most of the breakdown. It's not like me and you have broke down that much. I mean,
well, one other tournament story that I thought of while we were talking earlier about the casting and trolling, that NAWA tournament in Toledo, Ohio, where we didn't get back on day 3. Day 1, I was in 3rd place of that tournament. I was actually the first professional angler to ever walk across the stage with a 50-pound basket, which is kind of cool. There were two other guys that did it later that day, but I got to weigh in first, so I get to call myself first that day.
I like it.
But I ended up third place at the end of day one. Day two, I go to the boat ramp, and I told my co-angler, we called them amateurs then, because they were pro-am tournaments, to meet me at the boat ramp at 5 o'clock. 5:30 comes, he's not there. 6 o'clock comes, he's not there. 6:30 comes, he's not there. 6:45, they're playing the national anthem, he's still not there. I launch my boat, I idle across to the other side of the river where the weigh-in festivities were the day before.
That was in downtown Toledo, right?
Downtown Toledo, yep. So I idle across the river, find the tournament director, can you page such and such? They try to reach him, he doesn't answer any pages. Can't find him. I'm looking at the tournament director saying, I've got to go fishing. It's now 10 minutes after 7. Everybody's gone. I'm in third place, still sitting here with no co-angler.
And let me stop you for 1 second. So I'm assuming you were fishing by the can, so people understand, because this is where I grew up, right there in Toledo. You have realistically maybe almost 30 miles of driving before you even think about getting fishing in fishing waters, because you've got a ton of travel going down the Maumee River, which I'm not going to say there's not walleyes there, but you ain't fishing there. And so,
and then you got to Bay and Sandusky.
Yeah, I mean, or Maumee Bay. But yeah,
Maumee Bay, yep.
You've got 30 miles on the Great Lakes, just so people at home that aren't from our area understand. Driving 30 miles even on a nice day on Lake Erie, because even a nice day, you've got the rollers, you got all the traffic and all the craziness. That's like driving 100 somewhere else. It's just, I mean, and you always have that in the back of your mind, the time you have to plan, because things can go awry so quickly. Is that fair?
Yep. So we're sitting there talking, and the tournament director asked me, well, do you have any idea why this guy wouldn't be here? And I start thinking about it, and I'm like, I know exactly why he's not here. And the tournament director says, why do you think he's not here? And I said, well, yesterday at the weigh-in, he came and found me and congratulated me and was all excited that I was in third place. And the exact words out of his mouth were, I sure am glad I'm fishing with an Ohio guy, because I sure as hell don't want to go troll planer boards and crankbaits. I'm sure since you're from Ohio, you're chucking and winding, and that's what I do best. And I said, buddy, you can bring your Erie Dearies if you want, but we're not fishing with them till I got 50 pounds in that live well again. And he got so mad that he was going to have to troll, because the guy he trolled with the day before didn't catch much, that he didn't show up.
Oh,
so
I
literally, Ross, grabbed a guy in a suit and tie and wingtips and said, do you want to fish today? And he said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I'm serious. Do you want to go fishing? And he said, I'm in. So I gave him my extra rain suit, put him in my boat, and told the tournament director, I'll see you at 4 o'clock. And I took some businessman that came down to watch the boat take off.
Dude, that is incredible. You literally are the king of adversity. I mean, I would have been flipping out, because I've had those too, where, again, you know, and it's always when you're in the top 10. It's not one of those. It's not a day 2 when you made the wrong decisions or swung too hard in day 1. And you're like, really, you couldn't show up? Because, again, you know, for some people, that's the thing that I think that, you know, it's not worth talking about, because unless you're doing what we're doing, people aren't going to get it. But what is a hobby for everybody else? This is our living. And, you know, I don't know what that purse was then, but it was a lot of money to you.
It was more than I had.
That's right.
That matters.
Yeah, and a lot of people, you know, that's some of the problems with the pro-ams, and I think why they've made so many adjustments is some of these guys just don't understand really all that's involved, and that you spend a lot of time and money to be there and to be in position. And it's not like, you know, I know guys personally, not, you know, firsthand, but that I've seen where guys are like, well, it's going to rain today, so their amateur doesn't show up.
Right.
And you're like, wow. And nowadays, I think they tend to have some guys kind of on hand a little more than they did back in those days. It was more on the cuff back then. You were laying the groundwork for us nowadays.
Exactly. Well, not to take our conversation in a different direction, but I'm going to, because I can. You can change it back if you want. But
we're going to edit Johnny in 3, 2, 1. Go for it. We ain't got no script.
I've said it for years, Ross. I long still for the day that there is no co-angler. And it's not because they're not good people, and it's not because they're not good anglers, and it's not because they're not good guys. But I am fishing for a living, and they're not. And it just doesn't seem to work all the time. right? Some of those folks are there because their wife bought it for them for a birthday present. Some of those folks are there because they've never caught a walleye before, and you think I'm exaggerating, but I've had co-anglers get in my boat and say, I've never caught a walleye before, and they told me this is a good way to learn to catch them, so I signed up for this tournament.
And you're fishing for
Well,
100 grand.
I'm fishing for a living, and now I have someone in the boat that has never set the hook and reeled in a walleye before. That doesn't seem like that should have anything to do with the outcome of a pro tournament. The bass fishing world got away from it a long time ago, and they've seen incredible growth in their sport since they did it. And I'm hoping that someday that the walleye tournament world at the highest level, I'm not saying every walleye tournament has to get away from the pro-am format, but at the highest level where guys are fishing for a living, that the co-angler or the amateur partner or whatever you want to call them becomes more of a marshal or an observer. I think you should have that extra person in the boat, safety-wise, keeps people honest, makes you follow the rules. But, man, I don't ever want to be the guy that misses that $100,000 fish with the net, right? Is that really fair to that co-angler?
Well, yeah.
That my livelihood swam away because he's never netted a 10-pound fish before? I just wish it wasn't part of the game. I really do.
And I don't disagree at all. And sometimes it's an unfortunate situation. Sometimes it's these guys, they get in, like you said, and they've got a $10 rain suit on, and you're going 30 miles on Lake Erie. I've had where I've had to swap co-anglers out because I had a guy tell me, quote, do what you need to do, basically insinuating, I know you're local, let's cheat, and had to turn them in. And I've had a guy one time, I was in a top 10 in a major national tournament, and we're going into day 2, and the guy said to me, so what are we going to do on your side? I was like, what? He's like, well, this is what I'd like to do over here. And I said, man, I said, I'll listen to some suggestions, but we should start out with, I said, you do realize I fished like 60 days in a row, and we're sitting in the top 10. Like we got a real good chance here. Some guys trying to break out to, and there's a million stories. We could do a whole podcast just on that alone. But then, as bad as those stories are, and they affect what you do, and it affects your psyche a little bit during the day. I've met some guys as co-anglers to this day that are friends.
Best friends, yeah, guys you keep in touch with almost daily, right? That you met. Actually, Dave Noble, the gentleman that won the World Walleye Championship with me in the Masters Walleye Circuit, I met as a co-angler in a tournament. The guy lives in Dixon, Illinois, which is 1,000 miles from my home. And when my father passed away this winter, I walked into a little memorial service that we held for my dad, and there was Dave Noble sitting at a table waiting for me to walk in the door. And he was a guy that I met as a co-angler. He's, if not my best friend in the world, he's right up there near the top. And yeah, there are a lot of really, really good positive stories too. Both of us have those. But again, even the co-anglers I've talked to about this would say the same thing. Boy, do we get really nervous when we know a guy is in first, second, third place. They're afraid to move, right? They don't want to screw up the next bite. They don't want to miss a fish with the net. They don't want to be a guy that tied a knot that the jig came undone halfway to the boat and just cost you $100,000 and how many dollars in endorsements and whatever. So I say with today's technology, the reason the co-angler was originally invented was to be the sheriff. And there's other ways to have a sheriff in your boat now without having those guys have to fish side by side with you. So why not get it?
And especially when the reality is it's in these tournaments, it's Johnnie Candle. That's what it is. And you just think back like John Hoyer, that's fishing the National Walleye Trail. I think he took 2 firsts and a second or something like that. A couple of years ago, John was a co-angler. And
he was,
and I've known him for quite a while because of some other cross promotions, doing stuff with the ice team and stuff. He worked for a guide who I know well, and the point of it is if I have John Hoyer come as my co-angler, versus I've had some people with some serious, like they can't stand up in the boat, like they have serious physical conditions that they realistically shouldn't be there. Like I'm sure an insurance agent wouldn't allow it, and you have that, and I've got John Hoyer. Or, there's 100 guys like that you get. The guys that are locally guides or whatever. I mean, it's like having 5 pairs of hands versus doing some babysitting. And I completely agree with you. I think you're not getting out of it what you think. At the end of the day, there's people that can affect that outcome just too much that you have no control over.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
what? start a tournament circuit, Ross?
Because I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb. Me and you joke. I mean, we still fish a few derbies here and there. I fish way less than you do at this point. But the reality moving forward with tournament stuff is I don't know where it's even going. I mean, that's probably a whole podcast within itself too. But just doing what we do, we joke about it, but it's not a joke. And that our calendars are filled. You know what I mean? And I'm and just sponsors are pulling and wanting to do more of this and more of that. And the reality is, the stuff that we're doing, just like right now, we can get more of a reach than we can because how many people are going to really win a tournament? And if you're in third or fourth or fifth place, you just don't get any plugs. I mean, the TV shows don't get the ratings that they used to. The magazines don't exist. You know, I've looked at those numbers, and I know that many of our same bosses, you know, we have these conversations behind closed doors. They need production, and those numbers aren't there. So me and you doing these other things that we've done and currently do, it's just a better return for them, plain and simple.
Correct. It is. It is. If the tournament game on the walleye side doesn't change soon, it's going to go away. There's no doubt about it. We've seen the growth on the bass fishing side of the world. It's astronomical. When Major League Fishing announced they were coming on board, I had several conversations, some with you, that said, well, which one's going to die, FLW or BASS? I thought they'd both one of the two would fade away to nothingness. And holy crap, if all three of them aren't better than they ever were, right? They're getting bigger ratings. They've got more participation. We're seeing college and high school fishing grow like wildfire. But Ross, I have yet to see a high school or college walleye fishing tournament, right? If the walleye game's going to continue, they better change the format from what it was in 1988 when the PWT had that first tournament in Port Clinton, Ohio, because they haven't changed it once in all those years.
Well, that's a whole other podcast for another day, because you want to talk about ruffling some feathers. But there's just not as many guys that even want to make a living fishing for walleyes, even if things were much different than they are.
Right.
Where the bass world, they have the numbers just like everything else. They have the numbers on their side, and you can't do the same thing, you know, make one of those work with the other one. I mean, it's my opinion anyhow. But,
right.
And while, you know, me and you could probably tell stories till we're blue in the face, I think you need to leave us with one good guide story, because as a guy who's guided as much as you have, I mean, I imagine that most of them we probably can't even tell. Some of the good ones you really can't tell as much as we'd like. We'd have to be retired before we truly tell those. You know, I've got a Coast Guard guy.
I've got quite a few that I can't tell.
We've privately talked about a few of those. I've got a Coast Guard guy who I know well, and I wanted to have him on the podcast, and I found out in about 5 seconds that he's going to have to be retired before we could do this. God, those guys, they literally make them do an interview thing to do the interview. But you got to leave me with one good guide story that at least just to brighten a smile and let these guys know that, so you want to be a guide? Here you go.
Right. So I'll tell you one that was probably a screw up on my part more than a mishap by a guide client. I'm a young guy, still in college, University of Akron, not far from you. And I found out that I could fish year-round in a boat if I went a little bit northeast from where you live and I lived up to the Niagara River that flows into Lake Ontario. Phenomenal winter trout fishery. My little Lund 18-foot boat was perfect for it. I could either work at a minimum wage job all week during school and make $30 a week, or go to the lake and guide for 2 days and make $400 for the weekend. So I made good friends with one of the more, what would you call it, no-tell, motel type places in Niagara Falls that had zero business in the winter.
You know,
and they gave me a
how did we not talk about the crappy place? We talked about the back of the truck. How did we not talk about? So we could do a whole podcast just on the shittiest places we've stayed.
Exactly. So I go up to New York, fished all winter. It's starting to get close to springtime, probably mid-March. And as you know, Lake Erie starts to break up on a normal year. The ice starts to break up in that first early part of March to the middle of March. And it flows over Niagara Falls into the river and then melts or goes out into Lake Ontario to melt or wherever it goes. Well, I launched my boat in the river, and we're fishing, and we're catching some fish, and we're having a good day. And no one told me, and I didn't ask, so it was my own fault, that they were going to raise what they call the ice boom in the lower
I was wondering if you were going there. Oh, because I don't even know this one. Yeah, the old ice boom.
So they have a boom that they put across the river to hold those ice chunks back until it makes sense to let all the ice down the river at one time. Well, they lifted that boom, and I look up, and if you think the movie Titanic had a lot of icebergs in it, you ain't seen nothing. Literally a wall of ice about 10 feet tall coming downstream at about 7 or 8 miles an hour, because that's what the current is there, and you can't get through it. So I had no choice but to drive 11 miles to the mouth of the river, and I think it's about 12 miles to Olcott, New York, down the shore of Lake Ontario, pull into a marina, get a taxi cab, go back and get my truck and trailer, and drive back to Olcott to pick up my guide clients and my boat. Needless to say, I did not get a tip that day. They weren't overly impressed with their captain's skills on the water that day. It makes a neat story. I learned my lesson. The middle of March, when I go to that river, I always make sure that the ice boom's not coming up that day. But it was not
That's incredible.
Fun. Yeah, it was. It could have ended very badly, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
That ice would take anything out that's in its way.
Oh, it's like razor blades. It's like dynamite and razor blades.
If we wouldn't have been ahead of it, it could have got really, really bad.
So on this ice boom, because I know what the ice booms are, but how do they mark? Because I've never guided or fished there during that time. What do they do to note? Is there like a flashing light, or is there just they known that it's this day?
I guess that they publish it in the local newspapers up there, and they put it on the local radio stations. I don't know if they do anything different now, because the internet wasn't a thing then, and I haven't guided there since the internet has been a big deal. So I imagine now it's on the internet somewhere. They probably have a website that if you're on the river often, to go check to make sure that they're not going to raise these ice booms. But yeah, it was a pretty hairy experience. I should have known when we were the only boat on the river that day that something was up. But it was kind of nice having the river all to yourself. I wasn't going to complain.
Oh man, that is a great one that I have never heard, and that just goes to show you when you're a guy that's guided pre-internet era, pre-Facebook page. That definitely is saying something. Well, I definitely appreciate your time, and I think we're gonna have to have you back on, because I know it's going to be too long until you retire that you're going to tell us some of those really good stories, but I know you have a lot more, and I'm sure as some of the things I know you have planned, we definitely want to talk about as they develop. So thanks again for your time.
It's always fun, Ross. I look forward to doing it again.
All right, we're out.